You're listening to Kate Palmer from SparkleTart.com. Today I'm going to be creating a background that looks a little bit like aged copper with patina or verdigris. Now I've created a mixed media piece a little similar to this previously in that it uses the same technique, but today I'm going to show you how to use this rock salt technique with the starburst sprays for papercraft, so you can use it on your scrapbooks or on your cards. I'm going to be using some rock salt crystals. These are just coarse salt, it doesn't matter what kind as long as the crystals are rather large. I'm also going to be using some table salt. I've got Toto's Tornado Black Flat Fabio from Lindy's Stamp Gang. I have Teeth Chattering Teal Starburst from Lindy's Stamp Gang. Cattail Copper Brown, guess where from? Tibetan Poppy Teal. And Delphinium Turquoise. I've cut to size some pieces of white cardstock. Now it is quite important that you've already cut your cardstock to the size that you'd like to use, because this is using salt. It's not something that you really want to run through your best paper trimmer with its metal blade because it can cause rusting. I would only recommend using scissors or a craft knife to trim this afterwards, or of course you can easily run it through any of your dies or die cutting machines. Just wipe the dies off with a baby wipe afterwards so that they don't go rusty. And I've just got them in a little tray here so I don't make too much of a mess. I've cut a couple of square pieces and then a couple of extra pieces in case I need any additional embellishments in the same kind of pattern. Now with the Lindy Stamp Gang sprays, you need to make sure that you shake them to get all of the good stuff off the bottom. And you need to do this before you use them every single time. So I'm starting with the Cattail Copper Brown. I'm just going to add an even coat to all of the paper. Over all of the cards. Now you can see it has a brown base, and I hope you can see it has a copper shimmer. Now you can pretty much see the reason I'm doing this in a marbling tray, or I suppose any kind of tray really, as long as it's nice and flat. Alright, so I have a nice coverage of that cattail copper brown. These are the size of the rock salt crystals. You can see they're quite coarse. In Australia we can just buy this in a pack. I believe in the US and Canada that this is the size of the crystals that you use to put on your driveways when it's winter time. So what I'm going to do is just add a few random rock salt crystals. You may have seen or heard of the salting technique used with watercolors. Now obviously these aren't watercolors, and this isn't your average salting technique either. In watercolors you use the salt to give you a little bit of texture to the paint. With this we'll add texture to the paper itself, fundamentally changing the way that the paper behaves. You'll actually end up with textured paper. The salt crystals dissolve and partly reform within the paper fibres. So it's really interesting. Now I've just taken the paper liner out of my tray because what will happen is as these get wet they'll kind of cling to the plastic tray underneath, and that way they'll dry absolutely flat. So I'm just going to add a little of the table salt. Now all this does is give a slightly finer pattern. I'm not going to add this all over, I'm just going to add it sort of like, so it looks kind of like a marble vein I suppose, just sort of in a little pattern. You can see I'm being relatively generous with the salt. The salt's part of what gives you the pattern, so make sure you've got a little bit sort of at least over each card. This is going to need another layer of the cattail copper brown before I do anything else, just to build up that copper colour and the copper shimmer, because after all we are making Verdigris, which is copper. So we need lots of copper on there to give the right look. Now the next thing I'm going to add is some of the teeth chattering teal. Now this is one of the opaque white starbursts with a shimmer colour. And the reason I'm adding this is so that the blue stands out a little bit more against the copper. Because the copper is such a dark colour, if I were to spray either of those two blues over the top, you would see the shimmer, but you wouldn't see much of the blue. So this white will let me do that. Now you need to make sure you shape these opaque ones really well, because the opaque colouring in there is so fine, you can find it very easy to get the nozzle stuck. Now what I'm going to do with these is just kind of drip it on like this. If I want bigger areas of drips, I'll just sprinkle it closer and sprinkle more on. Now to get a few bigger patches, I'm just going to spray right up close. Alright, so the next colour is going to be the Delphinium Turquoise. And what I'm going to do with this is just give it a really good shake, and then on those larger areas I'm going to spray directly onto the white. See how that makes the blue show up a bit better? Now I'm also going to spray a little bit sort of over the top of the brown, or the copper I should say, because Verdigris doesn't just appear in single spots, it sort of happens all over the shop. Okay, you can already see how gorgeous this is looking. Now the next colour I have is the Tibetan Poppy Teal. Give this one a good shake. Now this one's quite a bit darker, so you want to be a bit sort of careful with this. So I'm going to apply it with one of these little plastic pipette things, and I'm just going to add this in spots. Now you can afford to be careful here, you've got time. Now I'm adding it in some places so that it stays as a circle, and others so it melds and blends with those colours underneath. Now because there's so much liquid on here, you can never exactly guarantee what's going to happen when it's dry. I really kind of like that fact. There's an element of surprise in here. It also makes it a bit more realistic, because patina in real life is a bit of a surprise. And I think I might be done. Now I've just got the one more colour to go, but what I'm going to do is I've got a little bit of water in my eyedropper now, and any bits of colour look a bit too prominent or out of place, I'm going to add a little bit of that water too, and it just makes the colour bleed into the background and softens it, so you get more of a realistic background that way. That's going to be so good. Now one last colour. I've got some of the Toto's Tornado Black, and I'm just going to drip this on in places just from the, see this? I'm just sort of lightly tapping, and it's just flicking the colour out of the end there. Now this is all wet, so this will all blend in to that finished product as well, and as it dries it will bleed. And this just stops the background from becoming too bright, and it gives it a bit of a grungy look. Now the worst part about this is you're going to need to wait. Leave it overnight at least, because it's going to need to dry. But this is going to look gorgeous, truly, truly gorgeous. What's going to happen from this process though, and I don't know if it's the salt or the soaking, but your cardstock will now feel a little bit different. It'll be a bit leathery. Once it's dry, you'll still be able to use it as normal. It'll just feel a little bit unusual. Now I'm going to go and leave this before I touch it any further. It doesn't need any more help from me. And we'll come back and see when it's done tomorrow morning. Okay. So I've waited until these pieces were dry, and I've gone outside and I've brushed off the larger and as many of the smaller salt crystals as possible. And what I'm left with is this gorgeous colour that I think looks rather a lot like Verdigris or Patina. Now when you get close, you can see that some of the salt crystals are still attached to the cardstock. Now these are quite firmly embedded in there, and this was the patch of smaller salt crystals that I've attached here. Now the reason they're stuck in the cardstock is because there was that much water that they've partially dissolved and recrystallized. So they're quite firm. I can rub them with my finger and nothing comes off. It's quite safe to use. What you'll note here is where the larger crystals were, where I've brushed them off. You can see the little patterns from the crystals. Now what they leave is a raised piece of cardstock. Let me see if I can show you that. See the little bumps here? The cardstock is actually sort of lifted slightly where those larger salt crystals have been sitting on it. So they've absorbed some of the shimmer where the salt crystal was, and if there's multiple colours, it might be the colour underneath, like the copper layer I laid down, or what happens in some other areas. And I think I can find one here. So for example, if you had put white cardstock underneath, you'll find that this creates a little blue ring because it absorbs some of the colour towards the crystal. It draws the water in, so it makes these little rings and patches. So when you look at this as a whole, you get the gorgeous shimmer from the Lindys, you get these interesting little bumps from the salt and the dissolved salt, and then you get some of the actual salt crystals. Makes it look very organic and really quite realistic. If I wanted to, I could spray a little bit more colour on these raised areas, or even go over that with metallics like rub and buff or something like that, to really pick out the texture in here, and that would make it even look more like an actual patina, or more like actual copper and verdigris. So I adore the colour here. You can just see that stunning shimmer that you get, and plus all of the texture from that salt. I think it looks quite realistic. You can see how textured that is. This is how I've used my faux patina background. I've used one entire piece as the base of the card, and then I've die cut several additional elements, which would be the wings and the little banner and the hearts, and used these as embellishments so that the card matches a little bit better. You can see there on the wings that the glossy accents looked gorgeous, but this was a little bit troublesome to use. I found that the salt reacted strangely with the gloss accents and made it go quite tacky almost the instant they touched each other. So that was a little challenging, but I do like the way all of this turned out. So I hope you've enjoyed seeing my faux patina or faux verdigris background. Of course you could use other colours for this as well. I think purple might look gorgeous, and I hope you have a go at this for yourself. Bye. Thanks so much for watching and have a wonderful day. Bye.